All right. So today we're going to review our purposes of grading, share some takeaways from the homework, practice the protocol of discussing problems of practice around rubrics, and talk about some rubric details. Once again, our timeline, if you've missed, for September and October, we were talking our intro, the purpose of grading, and foundations of equitable grading. For this month and next month, we'll be talking about rubrics for feedback and communication. We'll start off with rubrics this time, talk about problems of practice around rubrics. And then next time, as your homework, you'll want to work on a rubric, and we'll bring it back. And during our group time, you'll be workshopping and looking at how to revise your own rubrics. January, February, we'll talk about motivation. March, April will be multiple opportunities, and May and June will be implementation.
Also, just want to add in there that if you weren't able to come to the last two sessions or one of the last two sessions, each month we will put on our resources slide, we will put a link to the last session's slides and recording. So even if you missed it, you can go back and watch it as often as you like.
All right. So we're going to go back and look at our purpose of grading, the things that we've done in the last two sessions, debrief, protocol around problems of practice, and the rubric nuts and bolts. Just a reminder of our community norms. Make sure to be respectful of each other. That this is a safe place. We're going to be doing lots of discussions about somewhat emotional topics. Make sure all voices are heard and that we work together as a community to work on things and learn together. All right. So the foundations for equitable grading are the purpose of grading. If you go ahead and build the slide out, Christy, that'd be great. Separating behavior from academic work. Teaching and learning is specifically tied to a learning target. Students have multiple opportunities to demonstrate their learning. Teachers and students use rubrics to communicate a progression of learning and ensure equitable access to learning so that we're all doing the same thing. And today we're going to be working on the rubrics and the targets to communicate the progress of learning. So grading with rubrics, we're going to talk about how do rubrics help or interfere with grading, and that's when I'm going to pass it off to my friend, Christy.
Great, thank you. My mouse is very touchy. Okay, so first let's define what a rubric is. So when we want to describe the progression of learning for a topic, we use something called a rubric. And on the far left side, we have criterion that make up the components of the learning. So for example, you might start with a broad learning target, like chemical reactions. And then your criterion would be all of the pieces that you'll be teaching about chemical reactions. So I'm going to teach balancing. I'm going to teach types of reactions. I'm going to teach predicting products, etc. Like each of those would be a line item on my rubric. And then across these boxes right here, this is where I'm going to describe the different levels of learning. So in my district, we're on a 1 through 4 scale. So you'll see the rubric here is 1 through 4, but different districts have different scales. Some are 1 through 5, some are 1 through 8. Like it just depends on what your district has decided. And so because we're on a 1 through 4 scale, our 4 is highly proficient, nearing, and developing. So if I'm thinking about general language for a 4, 3, 2, or 1, the 3 is where we're meeting the target. That's like our benchmark. We're meeting at that point. So what does that look like? So I usually start there and I build out the language for a 3. A 4 is I am above the benchmark. So often that is I'm able to apply benchmark information to a new or an either a new or an advanced situation, something I haven't seen before, right? The proficient is we've practiced those, we've talked about them in class. I'm able to describe and show my understanding. A 4 is like, gosh, I haven't seen that before. And I'm going to take my information that I know and I'm going to apply it to a new, unique situation. And then a 2 and a 1, of course, are not quite meeting the benchmark. And these levels, this 4, 3, 2, 1, these really are symbols that describe a level of learning. They're not meant to be grades. The grade comes at the end after all of my evidence has been collected and evaluated. So that's I think that's a sticking point sometimes that people get into is they will grade, they will use the rubric and mark a student's piece of evidence. And if they get a 3, they go, oh, it's B. Well, the grade comes later at the end of all of the evidence. I mean, instead of a 4, 3, 2, 1, we could call it X, Y, Z, and W, right? Like it's a symbol that translates to a description. When I take all my pieces of evidence at the end and all of my descriptions, then I step back and look overall at this portfolio, what grade is associated with that. When I consider all of the line items in my rubric, I get an overall score. Then usually what happens is a school district then translates that into a letter grade, because the reality of the situation is that we have to do letter grades for colleges and scholarships and things like that, right? So we, at some point, do need to convert it to a letter grade. Agree, Monica. Monica says, in theory, there's still huge discrepancies. Totally agree with that. But yes, in theory, that is the thinking with standards-based grading. How novel that a district would be in alignment on grading practices. You know what, Jess, I appreciate that comment. It's a journey is what I would say. And even in my district, it is a journey. Just today, I collected feedback from principals about where we are with our standards-based practices. And I left the meeting feeling like, I don't know what the right word is. There's a lot of job security for me, right? There's a lot of work to do. So at least that, but it's also like, man, we've been at this for a long, long time and we still have a lot of work to do. So.
And it's not just a BSD thing either. Like other districts who have gone through this journey, it's a consistently, you got to continue to work on it. Not just an Oregon thing. Across the country, you talk to anybody who is working hard on this. You just got to keep working at it and keep getting better.
You do. It's not a static topic, right? We were really good about talking about it a lot, and then COVID came and we had a lot of other things to talk about. We stepped away from those conversations, and when that happened, people stepped away from standards-based practices. So it literally is an ongoing, continual discussion, conversation. We're always getting new teachers in, right? You have to keep those conversations going. It's not a one and done and whew, everyone's on board. It just really doesn't work like that, unfortunately. Okay, so just some pieces of advice here about, I love rubrics. Rubrics are my jam. I spend a fair amount of my job writing rubrics and working with teachers on writing rubrics. So it is, it's my thing. I really like it. So these are things that I do. That doesn't mean they're universal. You kind of have to find your flow with writing a rubric. Like I said before, I always start with the 3 column because that's where I want kids to be by the end of the unit, like at least here, right? Meeting the benchmark. So what do I want students to walk away with? So I'm looking for short, explicit expectations. There needs to be 2 pieces of evidence or 2 data points, or like the more specific you can be, the better for the student, the better the transparency is of the learning progression. It's a tricky balance though, because sometimes we want to use, if our learning targets are very broad and general, we want to use that for multiple units. So we don't want to get too specific. So it's a tricky balance. It sort of depends on if you have discrete, specific learning targets, or if they're kind of broad, big bucket learning targets. It sort of depends. From the 3 description, then I go to a 2, like what's not quite meeting. And then a 4 is highly proficient. So again, it's that new novel situation. I'm applying what I know to something I have not seen before. And if I'm able to do that, that usually means I have a really strong understanding of what I'm doing. All right. This link down here at the bottom, there's a lot of good books on rubrics. So I just put a couple links in here for things to take a look at. Not just books, but also articles.
And there's some at the end as well on the resources page.
Yeah. Also, this one's hard. Number 1 up here is hard. Avoid using deficit language. So when you get down to the 2 and the 1 description, it's easier, honestly, to talk about what the student can't do. I will be really truthful there. It's a lot easier to say the piece of evidence doesn't have this, or they didn't do that. And try instead to say what an evidence piece that is a 2 would have. And often the descriptions are not as long because the evidence doesn't have as many things, right? We want it to be what the student is able to do at a level of 2, not all the things that they can't do, right? Nobody feels good looking at something like that. Also using clear descriptive language that's not like you might know what it means, but try to look at it with the lens of a student eye. Are they going to know what clear conclusion means? Maybe, because maybe you've spent a ton of time in class showing examples of what a clear conclusion is. Defining that, if you've done all those things, then the term clear conclusion, they might know what that means. But if not, try to be more descriptive. Students will need to be trained on how to use a rubric, and you'll have to do it regularly. You'll have to frequently come back to the rubric. Even if you're doing like a practice problem, okay, let's get out our rubric. Let's take a look at where we are on the learning progression. Like kids need to do it over and over again in order to feel confident and competent using the tool. And then expect to revise it often. A lot of good conversation comes when you calibrate with a rubric. So you sit with other teachers and look at student evidence together. And really rich conversation comes from those occurrences, because you can really hash out like, this is a really important part for me, or this is a deal breaker. Like I have to have this, the student has to show this part in the evidence. Otherwise I can't give them a 3. Things like that really flush out in the conversations. And then you go back and you tweak the rubric and you make it better. So rubrics are not static documents. They're dynamic. They get changed, they get updated, they get tweaked, they get all the things. So expect to do that a lot. I've got a couple of examples here. I'm sorry if it's loud in the background. I have some more people around me that are doing webinars also. So how is it? It's okay. Yeah, sorry. Maybe I'll just yell and then we'll be competing or something. Let's see. It's not too bad. Thanks. Okay. I've got a couple here. So I've got 4 listed down here on the left. I put some non-science ones there, and then I put chemical reactions at the bottom. So there's some to look at. And then I've got one pasted in here. This is for a physics example. And you can see, remember the last 2 meetings, we talked about separating academics from behavior. So this asterisk down here, this criterion is graded separately under a behavior learning target. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these 6 things are part of the academic grade, And then this one is behavior down here. Notice that this
Do we want to just throw them in a breakout room for 5 or 10 minutes and let them explore through the different rubrics to kind of see what's going on? And then we can come back and talk through them, or do you want to talk through them first?
I wasn't going to go through them each. I was just going to look at this one. But we sure can do that if people want to take. What do you think, people? Do you want to take some time and look through the rubric in a small group?
I'd love to look through them as a large group if we could.
With a large group. Okay, let's do it. Let's see. Let me start with the chemical reactions one, because I referenced that one already. So here's the learning target at the top. Okay, again, this is for my district. So learning target number 5 is chemical reactions. And then here's the things I was referencing earlier, like all of the pieces about chemical reactions that I'm going to be teaching and assessing are listed. Each are a line item. So balancing, types, physical or chemical change, naming and writing compounds, predicting products. I mean, there's like 8 things here, right? So all of these things are part of my unit, and each of them has a description of a learning progression. So this is meant to be something that I come back to at the end of the unit, and I think about where is the student on each of these things. And I'll even highlight it, or I'll have students track their progress and do their own highlighting. And then at the end, I'll look at where all the highlights are to figure out, okay, what is their grade for this learning target? Let's see. Another one is mindfulness. I work with a teacher on, this is a new course, mindfulness through art. So it's an art course, but you can see same idea. So here's the learning target right here. They're going to generate, organize, and develop ideas. And there's only one piece really that goes with this learning target, according to this teacher, and that's the toolkit creation. It's really their portfolio. Here's the description of what that should look like in their learning progression. And then this right here, we have some schools that are middle years program. It's part of the International Baccalaureate program. And this is for teachers who teach in those schools. So after they assess this particular target, then they report on MYP criterion A. That's their learning target that they report on. So that's just something that we do in our district. So you can see there's several targets here. And some have only 1 line item and some have 2. Of course, chemical reactions had 8, right? It just kind of depends on how big and broad the target is. Computer game design. I was working on this with one of our computer programming teachers. You'll notice it's a draft. So here's the learning targets up here. And then these are the things that he pulled out and said, okay, well, there's going to be a presentation piece. There's going to be a feedback piece, comments and names. Notice we didn't even write in the 1 column. Sometimes we don't write in the 1 column because anything less than a 2 is a 1. And sometimes it's really hard to write a description for a 1 that's not deficit language. So sometimes we just don't. We just write 4, 3, and 2. So that's okay also. And then let's see. I think musical theater was the only one we haven't seen. Same idea here. Now, ensemble skills for this learning target right here has a lot of pieces. I normally don't love doing bullets in a rubric because there's a lot of things I have to pay attention to here. But on ensemble skills, according to the teacher, really did have these 4 pieces. And we really couldn't split out ensemble skills any more than that. So we went with it. So anyway, you'll notice she's got a lot of things here for this target, 4 things, but each thing has multiple little bullets in it, new artistic ideas, etc. So more descriptions and really teasing out what are the kind of the component pieces of the learning target. Once you get those component pieces pulled out, then you can start to write your descriptions. All right, so there was some examples. Let's go back here. Okay, Andrea, I think this is you.
Right, before we get into the summary, could you drop the link for the attendance in the chat? I can't seem to find the link to it since it's probably in my PPS email.
It's on the slides, so that's why I didn't pull it out before, is because
Oh,
I didn't
okay.
want to. I didn't want to stop. Let's see, where is it? Why am I not seeing it?
I didn't see it in the slides.
That's
Yeah.
because it's in this slide right here. Okay. Oop. Control C. Putting it in the slides. There we go. All right. Let's get back. Okay, Andrea. Let's get here. And here.
All right, so we gave you this homework and it's a little technical. So we thought we would summarize it for you. If you go ahead and build some of that out for me, that'd be great. So the idea with the homework is it's supposed to support the learning style, the cycle, so students can see where they're going, where they are, and what to do next. And like Christy said already, we want to use descriptive language and not evaluative language. So we want to say what we want to see there, not so like, you know, connected to the key points in the section, hypothesis, whatever. What we want to see, not what's missing. Right. So if you just click on that again, so not that it's excellent or good, because excellent and good are sort of meaningless words. What you define as excellent is different than what a student might define or what I might define. And then that makes it not reliable because, you know, Christy might have a different definition of excellence than I do. And you want to support formative assessment. So you want to be able to have in those pieces that students know what it is that they have and what it is that they're missing. So those are the key pieces of what really needs to be in your rubric. And there's one more piece, if you click, and they need to be trained on how to use the rubric. So if you just hand students a rubric, they have no idea what that means. And so oftentimes you'll need to go through, and whether or not you do it before the assignment or after, to go through and say like, hey, this is where I see what was there, what was not there. Oftentimes it works better if you have them try to use the rubric on examples so they have an idea of what it actually means to have a hypothesis, what that looks like, what does the data look like, what does it mean to have results in there, so that way when they say I've got it and they underline it, their definition matches yours.
I would even argue that if you don't train them, they'll never use it, right?
Yeah.
Because they literally don't know how. And then you've spent all this time writing this beautiful document that you might use, but they don't. And then teachers get frustrated about that. Well, I spent all this time and it's supposed to help them and they're not using, and they don't know how. Like you have to train them and do it over and over and over again till they really, it's ingrained.
And if you don't do it beforehand, you're going to have in a classroom of 30 conversations where they say, I have this. And you say, where is it? And they say, it's right here. And you say, oh, the rubric says you need to have this, this, and this. You'll have 30 conversations about the rubric instead of one full class conversation about the rubric. And if you have 30 separate conversations, you're going to have 30 separate understandings, and they're not all going to agree. Versus if you do it all together in one class, then everybody starts to use it. They understand how to use it and they can help each other.
The other thing I would say is, I was talking to a teacher about writing a rubric and she was really resisting me about it. Like, well, I just don't need to, because I spend a lot of time writing comments and feedback on kids' papers. And I said, imagine not having to do that because it's already written on the rubric, right? Like you don't have to write comments on every single paper. It's meant to be a transparent communication between you and the student, but also an efficient tool to use. Like once you create it, which can be a process, right? I don't want to sugarcoat it. Like it can be a process and the fine tuning and the talking about it. But once you get it pretty dialed in, your grading is much more efficient, right? Highlight, 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 mark the level of understanding, move on, right? And then you are just entertaining a lot fewer questions because it's literally already documented on the rubric.
And the students understand it better than those handwritten notes that they may or may not be able to read because you've written 500 of them and your handwriting has gotten sloppy because it's all there. It's the same comments you're giving everybody. The only problem is like rubrics, they are not static. Just like Christy said, you got to reevaluate them every year. Your students' needs change, your goals in the class change. They're not going to be big changes every year, but you want to tweak them, you want to revise them, you want to say like, oh, everybody didn't understand what this sentence meant, so I'll want to revise it, or I'll want to make it a little bit better, make it a little bit shinier. And make sure that, and when you look at your rubrics to see, did it work well for me this year? You want to think about when I grade the work and whether I'm tired or I'm energized or it's the first one or the last one, am I giving them always the same score? Does what you've written down describe the student performance, help the students prepare and make sure that they have the pieces that they need? Does it support their learning so they can go, well, I thought I had that, but now I understand what that means to have evidence or reasoning? And do the students understand them? Or are they just like a piece of paper you stapled to their work and they have no idea what it means, that you circled a bunch of words that are meaningless? And are they motivational? The last piece is really around like, when you give someone a rubric and they know how to use that rubric, does it help them do and get a better score because they know how to get there? Because they can say, oh, all I needed to do was add a clear explanation that tied my data to my hypothesis in order to get that higher grade that I wanted. I know how to do it, so I can do it. So it's motivational for me because I see a pathway to success. So that's kind of the summary of what we were hoping to get out of the homework. And I think that puts it back to you, Christy.
Now, you'll recall last time I spent a lot of time talking about the protocol, and then we ran out of time to do the actual activity. So we had to do a quick pivot and do a large group, which went okay, but the power is really in the small group. So we actually built in lots of time this time to actually work through the entire protocol in small groups together. So just as a short reminder, here's the visual, right, where we identify the problem, we analyze it, we develop a plan and how to implement it. And remember that there are roles. We have the presenter, and that's the person who volunteers like, hey, I have an experience that I want to share, and I'd love to get feedback and thoughts and make progress on this. So they give an overview and share. The consultants ask clarifying questions first, then they go a little deeper and ask probing questions. Then the whole group discusses while the presenter is listening. Then the presenter summarizes what they heard, and the facilitator leads a brief conversation on reflecting on the process. The facilitator also can be facilitator keeps time. There it is at the top. So the power is in the conversation, but it's also in making sure that you progress through all of the pieces. So the facilitator role is important to kind of keep everyone on schedule, on track. So what we'll do when we come back is then we will populate what was the problem of practice that you guys talked about, and kind of what was the takeaway from that. The slides have editing access, so when we come back, then we will go ahead and populate this slide and kind of share out as a larger group what are the things that we talked about. Anything else, Andrea, to add to that before we go off to breakout rooms?
The only thing I want to say is if you'll stop sharing for a moment, I want to make sure that I set the share screen settings so that everybody can share their screen. And sometimes Zoom does weird things if you're sharing when I do that. So anyway, I've got that set up so everyone should be able to share their screen so that you guys can pick what's going. I've got, there should be like 4 people in your room, but if you end up in a room where folks aren't talking or a bunch of people are driving and so nobody can present in your particular room, come back to the main room and we'll put you in a different room and you can just join another group. It's not a big deal. They are random assignments, so there was no like favoritism. I didn't want to put you in the good group or the bad group. It's just Zoom's choice. Any questions before we send folks off? I think the plan is what, to give them about a half an hour to 45 minutes, depending on how things sound when we're dropping into folks, and then we'll debrief and come back and finish things up. All right. I'll go ahead and open those rooms. Once again, come back if you end up in a room where nobody can present and we'll spread people out. My computer said that everyone was going to be in a room of 4, but I already see people are in rooms of 3. Whatever, it'll be.
Andrea, can you re-invite me, please?
Yeah.
Or no, I think I can just click here. Never mind.
Yeah,
Got
you're
it.
in 2, Christine.
Okay, thank you.
Christina. Yeah. Elena, you're in 3, room 3.
And then, Christy, you could stop sharing your screen. You're still sharing.
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha.
And
Do
that
you want to
way,
pause the recording? All right, so share. So I was just taking a peek at what folks were writing about here, and wanted to look at some with you. So I really identified with what group 1 had to say, and I've heard this definitely from teachers before. Like, we don't want to create a rubric so that all the evidence that we get looks the same, right? We don't want it to be boxing people in. We want to give them enough information so that they know what they're shooting for and they know how to get there, but then it's not so prescribed that then everyone is making the exact same thing, right? That's a struggle sometimes with exemplars too. I want to show exemplars. I want to show a range of exemplars, but I'm a little cagey about it too sometimes, because I don't want kids then just reproducing what they saw. This, goes against the whole point of showing an exemplar. So I hear you on that, and I think it's that sweet spot between specific but not formulaic, right? And I think you tease it out over time with. That's part of that dynamic nature of a rubric, right? You might go through a project or an assignment and all the evidence you get in feels like, gosh, so a lot of this is the same. I'm going to go back to my rubric. I'm going to tweak it a little bit and make it a little less, spelled out. Group 2 had an interesting thing too, talking about using rubrics across multiple grade levels. So this is vertical articulation at its finest, right? So a great example of this is like writing a CER. What does that look like in 9th grade? What does it look like in 10th grade, 11th and 12th? So we're taking the same rubric, but we're changing our language in the rubric to show an increased complexity, to show a deeper analysis, right? Like our skills are getting better and better at our analysis and our reasoning as we progress through the years of high school. So we want it to be generic in that I'm going to use the same structure and format across the years, but my language is getting more sophisticated, complex. I'm expecting more as they have more and more skills to do it. and even what it looks like at the start of the year versus the end of the year, 100%. Sometimes we have a semester 1 rubric for a CER, and we have a semester 2 rubric for a CER, especially if we're going to be doing a lot of CER writing, right? We're starting kind of on the easier side, and then we build complexity as we gain skills. One in particular that I do that with is error analysis. That's a hard thing for kids to do, right? And so we start with some real basic errors up front, and we talk about how it impacts the data. And then as we build progression, you know, through our multiple experiments, then we add a piece of how does it affect the results? And that's even harder to do because they have to reason through often if there's a calculation, they have to reason through the calculation. How does the error impact the final answer, right? So that's a great one to split up even into semesters as well. And grade levels, I would say. Group 3 is talking about, it's kind of like group 1. How do we balance between enough detail and too much detail, making it universal, but then useful enough to give enough specific feedback, right? And again, my best answer is that it will take time and iterations of the rubric. And the more you calibrate, the quicker that gets resolved, right? Because
And one of the things Susan Burkhart talks about often is that, like, you can have, you know, generic rubrics and task-specific rubrics, where the task-specific rubrics talk about some of the details that feed into that generic rubric. So you're like, every time you have to have for CER, for example, you have to have your evidence, you have to have your reasoning, but in this specific activity, in this specific task, that reasoning has to include something about energy or something about particles, and the next one it has to include something about this. So you can kind of have more task specific inside of the universal rubrics as well. You can make that as well.
And I'm going to show some examples of that next time, literally what Andrea just talked about. Like if we build our rubrics for our learning targets, then I have everything there that I need, that I can pull out this line item and I'm going to attach it to this task. And then I'm going to pull out this line item and attach it to this task, right? I don't need to write 7,000 rubrics for one class. I need to write my learning target rubrics, and then I pull out the line items that I'm going to be evaluating on my task, right? I've already done the work. Now I just pull out what I'm going to use. So we'll talk about that more next time. I like group 4 is struggling there with like how much, like how detailed do we want to get? Because kids aren't going to read it, or they're going to get lost in there's a lot of words here. It's overwhelming. I can't even take all this in, right? And someone said using links so they can go someplace else and they can read the super detail. I wonder if they'll do that though. That's my first wonder. Will they click on that? Will they actually go and read it? I think it just comes down to the practice in class, honestly. Making it simple and usable and not overwhelming, but enough detail that it's they're getting something out of the process of using it, right? I like group 5 because I got a great example to show. So they're saying, like, what if the kid's like all over the place on the rubric, right? We're highlighting and they're just all over the place. How are we going to arrive at a score for the unit? Well, love that you asked that. Here is my example of that. So this is for another presentation that I did with new teachers. Here's that chemical reactions learning target rubric. Excuse me. And the highlights that I did here, these represent the student's best score for each of these line items. So I evaluated the student multiple times on each of these things in a unit. Right? Balancing reactions was like the first thing that we did. And then I'm literally going to have them balance reactions in every other piece of the unit. So I get so many opportunities to reevaluate their knowledge of balancing reactions. It's those multiple opportunities are built into what I'm already doing. Fast forward a few months when we talk about multiple opportunities, we're going to be talking about that again, right? Ways to build it into what you're already doing. We don't need to rewrite another test, right? So stay tuned, that's coming up. But here's the student, here's their highlights. Now I stand back and I look overall at the rubric. I know it has to be a whole number, 1, 2, 3, or 4. How am I going to arrive at it? This is a fantastic conversation to have when you're calibrating, right? It's actually moderating at this point because I'm looking at a whole portfolio of evidence instead of a single piece of evidence. And then we are discussing, are there any deal breakers here? Like if you get a 2 on solubility, can you be proficient in this unit, right? Those are the conversations that we have. So if I stand back, I feel like student is mostly 3s here. Maybe solubility and ionic, net ionic are smaller things. Like I'm not as concerned about those. And so overall, I might give the student a 3. Maybe ionic, net ionic is a deal breaker. And we have agreed and communicated with the kiddo, with our students, multiple times up front. You can't get a 2 in ionic, net ionic and still be proficient in the unit. Like that would be something I would say over and over and over again, lots of opportunities to show proficiency in that. But that's an example. And then finally, oh, here we are again, creating a rubric that's detailed, yet not too wordy, right? A lot of you are on the same page with this, right? Totally valid concern to have. And again, teasing that out in the process of doing it, practicing with it, calibrating with it, having lots of conversations with it. So excellent. I hope that the problem of practice protocol was useful and interesting. I love it. I love doing that with my peers because I get so much out of it. I learn so much from just listening to other people talk about the issues in their classroom. It's relieving to me in a way, like, okay, other people experience that too. Like, thank goodness. We will be revisiting the protocol again. Just swinging it back to Mr. Joe Feldman again. These are his pillars of equitable grading practices. Where do you think rubrics falls? Can you type it in the chat? Where do you think rubrics falls? Monica, I love that question. I'm gonna come back to it in a second. Dustin says all 3, all. Bias resistant. Yep. All of them. All 3, but accurate mostly. Nice. Yeah, I think it falls in motivational too, because like Andrea said earlier, when the kids know how to get there, how to succeed, what is the pathway, that's highly motivational. Like it's not a moving target. I'm not guessing what the teacher wants. Like it's really clearly laid out there, right? Highly motivational, very transparent. Yep. Awesome. Great. Where our grades are based on valid evidence. That's right. Good. All right. I think it's you, Andrea.
Yes.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
wanted some more, we put some books in here for if you wanted some more reading around it. So the top 2, there's Brooke Hart's book on creating and using rubrics. You can look at that. There's also Gusky and Burkhart about what do we know about grading, that kind of puts us back on the track of things that work and don't work. And if you want to hear more about that single point rubric that came up from group 4, here's a link to the Cult of Pedagogy podcast on there. Like Christy said earlier, there are links to the slides from session 2 and the recording from session 2. So if you missed session 2, you can go back and see that. Or if you're like, hey, there was that thing in the slides I wanted to see from session 2, it's right there in there. So I'm just going to drop the link to the slides in here again, just so that you've got that. And those are just some resources to look at. Now, we had a lot of conversation. Go ahead to the next slide. We had a lot of conversation about how do we do make sure it's got enough words and is specific enough, but not too wordy. Well, here's your opportunity. Next class, the next session we have, which is December 13th from 4:30 to 6. We're going to have the same Zoom link. Write and modify your rubric, and we'll have you guys talk to each other about making sure it has the right amount of specificity and isn't too wordy. So you guys get a chance to practice that with your own rubrics and get feedback on what is the right amount there, because that seems to be where everybody is, like the sticking point. How do I make sure it's there? So that's what the homework is. And then Christy put a comment in the chat about reaching consensus. I know that for me, when I've had a smaller team, we kind of met on a regular basis, and I was the one pushing for stopping by every teacher's classroom, making sure we're talking about having everything in alignment. In my current school, when we actually are in the classroom and not on the strike line, we have a common prep, and we use that common prep. There's, I think, 5 of us that meet to discuss, like, what are the things that are must-haves for passing the test, and what are the things that are nice to have. So we've sort of put an outline of, like, they have to be able to do this, they have to be able to solve this problem or have this skill and demonstrate it in one of these ways in order to pass. And if they don't, here are the other opportunities we're going to give them. So, but for sure, time is really important, and you have to make time for those conversations. And just like it's important to have relationships with students to have them learn, and you have to have relationships with your colleagues to kind of get on the same page. Do you want to add some more to that, Christy?
Just my second comment there, it does take time. That an early investment, especially early in the year or when you're first writing rubrics. My colleagues and I would spend 2 hours after school calibrating an assessment, and we would come to the table with 5. Like, I would bring 5 student papers, and my colleague would bring 5, and my third colleague would bring 5, and we would have already marked them, and then we just round robin them and mark each one, hiding the other people's marks, and then we'd open it all up and compare, and then any that we disagreed with, we talked about at length. And it took a couple of hours, but you know what, as the year went on, it took less time, and then we didn't even do it after that. Like, we had it really dialed in. We knew what we wanted, we knew what we expected, and the next year we didn't need to meet, or we met only very briefly about that same unit test. So it does take time up front.
And it cuts down on those conversations that students have about the easy teacher versus the hard teacher, because everyone's grading the same way. And then it's just a matter of who explains it in a way that works for you. All right, I'm going to stop recording because we're at this.
Let me add just a comment about the exit ticket. We have not been very good about reviewing what we've been learning on the exit ticket. Please know we read every single word that you submit on the exit ticket. It's very valuable feedback for us, and it helps us really think about how to kind of fine tune it and tweak it based on what you want to see. So you'll notice in this exit ticket, I'm asking you really specifically, next time we're going to dig in a little deeper. Is there something in particular that you want to spend some time on? That, you know, I have a month to sort of think about it and craft it a little bit and just make it really, really kind of dialed in to you personally. I try my best. So we'll try to be better about addressing what we're reading on there, but please know we do read every single word. So.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording, and then